D'Alembert smiles at the poor blind parliaments, seconding with all their might the plans of the conspirators. It is in this idea that he writes thus to Voltaire: "The laugh is no longer on the side of the Jesuits, since they have fallen out with the philosophers. They are now at open war with the Parliament, who find that the society of Jesus is contrary to human society. This same society of Jesus on its own part finds that the order of the Parliament is not within the order of those who have common sense. And philosophy would decide that both the society of Jesus and the Parliament are in the right." And again, when he writes to Voltaire, this evacuation of the college of Louis le Grand, the Jesuits' college at Paris, is of more importance to us than that of Martinico. Upon my word, this affair is becoming serious, and the people of the Parliament don't mince the matter. They think they are serving religion, while they are in reality forwarding reason without the least suspicion. They are the public executioners, and take their order from philosophy without knowing it. Wrapped in this idea, when he sees the encyclopedian commands nearly executed, he openly avows the cause of his revenge, and even implores heaven that his prey may not escape him. Philosophy, says he, is on the eve of being revenged of the Jesuits, but who will avenge it of the other fanatics? Pray God, dear brother, that reason may triumph even in our days. And this day of triumph comes. He proclaims a long concerted exploit. At length, he cries, "On the 6th of the month we shall be delivered from all that Jesuitical rabble. But will reason by that have gained, or the wretch have lost ground?" Thus we see that under this shocking formula, the destruction of Christianity is linked with that of the Jesuits. D'Alembert was so thoroughly convinced of the importance of their triumph over that order, that, hearing one day of Voltaire's pretended gratitude to his former masters, he immediately wrote to him, "Do you know what I was told yesterday? Nothing less than that you began to pity the Jesuits, and that you were almost tempted to write in their favor, as if it were possible to interest anyone in favor of people on whom you have cast so much ridicule. Be advised by me, let us have no human weakness. Let the Jansenitical rabble rid us Let the Jansenitical rabble rid of us the Jesuitical, and do not prevent one spider from devouring another." Nothing could be more ill-grounded than this alarm. Voltaire was not the writer of the conclusions drawn by the Attorney Generals of the Parliament, as D'Alembert had been informed, who himself had been the author of Mr. de la Chalotais, the most artful and virulent piece that appeared against the Jesuits. Voltaire, however, was not less active in composing and circulating memorials against them. If he suspected any great personage of protecting the Jesuits, he would write and use his utmost endeavors to dissuade them. It was for that purpose he wrote to the Maréchal de Richelieu, I have been told, my lord, that you have favored the Jesuits at Bordeaux. Try to destroy whatever influence they may have." Again, he did not blush to upbraid Frederick himself with having offered an asylum to these unfortunate victims of their plots. Full as rancorous as D'Alembert, he would express his joy at their misfortunes in the same gross abuse, and his letters show with what a depth he shared it. "I rejoiced with my brave chevalier." Writing to the Marquis de Villeville on the expulsion of the Jesuits, Japan led the way in driving out those knaves of Loyola. China followed the example of Japan, and France and Spain have imitated the Chinese. Would to God that all the monks were swept from the face of the earth. They are no better than those knaves of Loyola. If the Sorbonne were suffered to act, it would be worse than the Jesuits. one is surrounded with monsters, I embrace my worthy chevalier, and exhort him to conceal his march from the enemy. What examples does the philosophist of Ferney adduce the cruelties of Taiko-sama, who, while expelling and crucifying the missionary Jesuits, also murders thousands and tens of thousands of his subjects in order to eradicate Christianity, and the Chinese, less violent indeed, but with whom every persecution against the missionaries has always been preceded or followed by a prohibition to preach the gospel. Can a man build upon such authorities without forming the same wish? It is to be remarked that Voltaire dares not cite the example of Portugal or of its tyrant Carvalho. The truth is that, with the rest of Europe, he is obliged to confess that the conduct of this minister in Portugal with regard to the Father Malagrida and the pretended conspiracy of the Jesuits was the height of folly and the excess of horror. It is always worthy of remark that the conspiring sophisters spared no pains to throw the odium of the assassination of Louis XV on the Jesuits, and more particularly Damilaville, whom Voltaire answers in the following manner: "My brethren may easily perceive that I have not spared the Jesuits, but posterity would revolt against me in their favor, were I to accuse them of a crime of which all Europe and Damien himself has cleared them. I should debase myself into the vile echo of the Jansenists, were I to speak otherwise." Notwithstanding the incoherency in their accusations against the Jesuits, D'Alembert, convinced of Voltaire's zeal in this warfare, sends him his pretended history of these religious, a work of the fallacy of which his own pen is the best guarantee. When he speaks of it as a means for the grand object, "I recommend this work to your protection," he writes to Voltaire. "I really believe it will be of service to the common cause, and that superstition notwithstanding the many bows I pretend to make before it, will not fare the better for it. If I were like you, far from Paris, I would certainly give it a sound threshing with all my heart, with all my soul, and with all my strength. In short, as they tell us, we are to love God. But situated as I am, I must content myself with giving it a few Philips, apologizing for the great liberty I take, and I do think that I have hit it off pretty well." Could the reader for a moment suppress his indignation at the profligacy of the style? Would not the hypocrisy, the profound dissimulation of which these sophisters speak so lightly, rouse it anew? If the annals of history should ever be searched, it would be in vain to seek a conspiracy, the insidiousness of whose intrigues was of a deeper cast, and that from their own confession. As to Frederick, his conduct during the whole of this warfare is so singular that his own words alone can give a proper idea of it. He would call the Jesuits the lifeguards of the court of Rome, the grenadiers of religion, and as such he hated them, and triumphed with the rest of the conspirators in their defeat. But he also beheld in them a body of men highly useful and even necessary to his state. As such he supported them several years after their destruction, and was deaf to the repeated solicitations of Voltaire and his motley crew. One might be almost led to think that he liked them, for he openly writes to Voltaire, "I have no reason to complain of Ganganelli. He has left me my dear Jesuits, who are the objects of universal persecution. I will preserve a seed of so precious and so rare a plant, to furnish those who may wish to cultivate it hereafter." He would even enter into a sort of justification with Voltaire on his conduct, so opposite to the views of the party. Although a heretic, and what is still more an infidel, says he, I have preserved that order after a fashion, and for the following reasons. Not one Catholic man of letters is to be found in these regions except among the Jesuits. We had nobody capable of keeping schools. We had no Oratorian fathers, no purists, piaristes, or fathers of charity schools. There was no other alternative but the destruction of our schools or the preservation of the Jesuits. It was necessary that the order should subsist to furnish professors where they dropped off, and the foundation could suffice for such an expense. But it would have been inadequate to pay the salaries of laymen professors. It was, moreover, at the University of the Jesuits that the divines were taught, who were afterwards to fill the rectories. Had the order been suppressed, there had been an end of the university, and our Celestian divines would have been obliged to go and finish their studies in Bohemia, which would have been contrary to the fundamental principles of our government. Such was the language of Frederick, speaking in his regal character, and such were the political reasons he so ably adduced in support of his opposition to the sophisters. Alas, as I have already said, in Frederick there were two distinct men, one the great king, in which character he thinks the preservation of the Jesuits necessary, the other the impious sophister, conspiring with Voltaire, and triumphant in the loss which religion had sustained in that of the Jesuits. In the latter character we find him freely exulting with the conspirators and felicitating D'Alembert on this happy omen of the total destruction of Christianity. In his sarcastic style he writes, "What an unfortunate age for the court of Rome! She is openly attacked in Poland. Her lifeguards are driven out of France and Portugal, and it appears that they will share the same fate in Spain. The philosophers openly sap the foundations of the apostolic throne. The hieroglyphics of the conjurer are laughed at, and the author of the sect is pelted. Toleration is preached, and so all is lost. A miracle alone could save the church. She is stricken with a dreadful apoplexy, and you, Voltaire, will have the pleasure of burying her, and of writing her epitaph, as you formerly did that of the Sorbonne." When that which Frederick had foreseen really came to pass in Spain, he wrote again to Voltaire, "Here is a new victory that you have gained in Spain. The Jesuits are driven out of the kingdom. Moreover, the courts of Versailles, of Vienna, and of Madrid have applied to the Pope for the suppression of diverse convents. It is said that the Holy Father, though in a rage, will be obliged to consent. Oh, cruel revolution! What are we not to expect in the next century? The axe is at the root of the tree." On one side, the philosophers openly attack the abuses of a sainted superstition. On the other, princes, by the abuses of dissipation, are forced to lay violent hands on the goods of those recluse who are the props and trumpeters of fanaticism. This edifice, sapped in its foundations, is on the eve of falling, and nations shall inscribe on their annals that Voltaire was the promoter of the revolution effected during the 19th century in the human mind. Long fluctuating between the feelings of the king and the sophister, Frederick had not yet yielded to the solicitation of the conspirators. D'Alembert was particularly pressing in his. We see how earnestly he was bent on its success by the following letter, which he wrote to Voltaire. "My venerable patriarch, do not accuse me of the want or zeal in the good cause. No one, perhaps, serves it more than myself. You would not guess with what I am occupied at present, with nothing less, I assure you, than the expulsion of the Jesuitical rabble from Silesia, and your former disciple is but too willing, on account of the numerous and perfidious treacheries which, as he says himself, he experienced through their means during the last war. I do not send a single letter to Berlin without repeating that the philosophers of France are amazed at the king of philosophers, the declared protector of philosophy, being so dilatory in following the example of the kings of France and Portugal. These letters are read to the king, who is very sensible, as you know, to what the true believers may think of him, and this sense will, without doubt, produce a good effect by the help of God's grace, which, as the scripture very properly remarks, turns the hearts of kings like a water cock. It is loathsome to transcribe the base buffoonery with which D'Alembert was accustomed to season his dark plots, and to observe his clandestine persecution against a society of men whose only crime was their respect and reverence for Christianity. I pass over many more expressions of this stamp, or not less indecent. It will suffice for my purpose to show how little, how empty, how despicable these proud and mighty men were when seen in their own